Okay, I think we're going to make a start. Thank you so much for coming. It's wonderful to see you all here tonight. Hopefully some of you might have had a chance to see the exhibition upstairs, which we opened at 4:30. And if not, you can see it after this discussion, which will be from 6 o'clock. My name is Amy Budd. I'm Senior Curator Exhibitions at Modern at Oxford. And I'm joined by Jo Widoff, who is you have so many job titles, I forget what they are.
It's not that relevant right here, but I am a curator of international art and head of collections for Moderna Museet Stockholm.
And I'm delighted to have Jo here to talk about our co-curated exhibition, Monica Sjöö, The Great Cosmic Mother, which opens in Oxford tonight and was previously at Moderna Museet from May to October earlier this year, and will tour to Moderna Museet in Malmö next spring. So we are the second venue in the tour. This is maybe a different format for the type of event we would have for an exhibition opening, where normally there'd be an artist in conversation. But in lieu of the artist, it's Jo and I thought we could just have a very informal chat about our experience of curating the exhibition, of how we both came to Monica's work, and maybe to give some insight into that process so you can understand a bit more about the exhibition upstairs when you go upstairs to see the show. For those who might not be familiar with Monica's work, Monica was a Swedish artist, writer, activist, and eco-feminist who lived and worked in Bristol for most of her adult life. She was a major advocate for freedom of oppression in all its forms, and that manifested through her feminist organising as part of the women's liberation movement, but also through her spirituality and being a major experiment of the goddess movement in the UK and internationally. I thought we might start this conversation just by talking about how we both came to Monica's work. Personally, Monica was unknown to me up to maybe 5 years ago, where I was working on an exhibition about the legacies of the domestic and feminist art practice in the UK. And I arrived at Monica's work through a text by the art historian Amy Tobin, who has written an essay in our catalogue. And her research really is about the history of women's art movement in the UK. And there was a very small footnote in a text that she'd written about Monica, and that was the instigator to find out more through various research at Feminist Archive South and discussion with many other people. But I wondered, Jo, whether you could also say where your interest in Monica's work started.
Well, actually, out of not knowing that much of Monica, as you started by saying, Monica Sjöö is a Swedish artist, although I don't think many people in Sweden actually think of her as a Swedish artist because she moved so early to the UK and was so very present here that actually I think that she's much less well known in Sweden than she would be in the UK, or much less researched. However, as I've been at the Moderna Museet for a long time, we actually did acquire works from Monica in a very particular acquisitions campaign called the Second Museum of Our Wishes, which was specifically aimed at acquiring women artists historically, so that we would be able to actually amend, which is the wrong word, of course, because we will never be able to amend the balance in our collection, but that we would be able to display important women artists within our collection galleries. And so Monica Sjöö was surprisingly actually one of them. And she was joined in this campaign by artists such as Jude Chicago, Caroline Schneemann, and many, many others, including Russian avant-garde artists and so forth. So I always kind of had this curiosity about Monica's work, but never really had the chance to read up on it. There's not that much written, and I think maybe we can come back to that. But the catalog that we did is actually, quite important in that way. But having kind of pushed through an exhibition of Hilma af Klint, Monica became more interesting to me, and I did a collection display where I kind of positioned her work within a Swedish context, and suddenly I realized that we have to do a show. and then strangely you were thinking the same thing at the same time, and so this collaboration is not so much, of course, that exhibitions tour and you make a whole thing out of it, and they travel to different countries and different places. But this exhibition is not a tour in that sense. It's actually a true collaboration. And it's been hugely beneficiary to be able to have us working together, because I have absolutely, or absolutely no is perhaps wrong, but I have very little knowledge of a British feminist scene, whilst as you are very kind of indebted, of course, in this landscape. And so I think that this kind of almost binational, kind of strange, perfect, we should even get money from some kind of EU fund for working together this way, has been really beneficiary.
Yeah, completely. And certainly, I mean, when we came to research the archive, I mean, there's a huge portion of Monica's archive which is still held with the estate, which is in Swedish. And it would be, in many ways, it would have been incredibly challenging to have staged an exhibition such as this without a Swedish partner and without your language, and also the insight into the context that she was working in Sweden, which is quite distinct and quite different to the moment that Monica arrived in Bristol, to my mind. We have some slides prepared. This is very spontaneous and kind of responsive, but I thought we would start having introduced from your point of view, Joe, your interest, just to kind of refer to the exhibition that you created in Stockholm. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's a very different show than up here.
It is. Maybe you could, I mean, it's a very beautiful show in very different spaces, and you approached installing the works, with a very different approach. It's softer. I remember you saying you wanted the works to be softer somehow.
I wanted to, this is always a little bit intricate. Of course, knowing your galleries, you also know the disadvantages of your galleries. And this gallery up here is, light and beautiful. But the gallery that I had at my disposal at Moderna Museet is our cellar galleries, our level 2 galleries. And they were constructed for photography and really small. And I really felt that it was important somehow to be a little bit disarmed when entering the exhibition. And that's why I wanted a soft exhibition. I didn't want a soft exhibition in terms of it to be feminine or something like that, but rather just the kind of experience of entering into something else, which I think was important. And then we constructed these metal frames for it just because I wanted it. And this was something that I came to quite late in the process, and I think it had to do with our conversations and our research and the many conversations we've had with art historians, researchers, but also friends of Monica's. The kind of acknowledgement that this is perhaps not only gallery art. This is not paintings that were supposed to be shown in a white box or that didn't have any meaning. I mean, they're really much kind of torches in a debate somehow, or torches into an attempt to change something. And I think that was incredibly important. And so for me, it was urgent to have them present within kind of the gallery, but also among the audience. And that's why we constructed these metal frames for them.
Yeah, they're incredibly sculptural, your show. And I loved how you could see between and through the paintings as well, and especially in this first room, which was full of the more figurative portrait paintings. It was really effective, and I think I riffed off that, or tried to as much as we could with this exhibition, where you could look through and past works.
I mean, I like it, but I should say, and I don't have kind of the distance enough, that people also hated it. I mean, some people absolutely hated it. I still kind of enjoy it, but I mean, it differs. It's about introducing something, and we can talk all night about exhibition scenographies, but we shouldn't do this. I'm very happy to see the show here. Of course, it looks very different.
It's a different kind of impact, I think. But the carpet was really effective as well. Thinking more about just the Swedish context, I wanted to, could you explain, well, in our research, when I was also discovering more about the Swedish feminist art scene, I think through you and through your knowledge of Monica's involvement and through your research and contacts with Swedish art historians. And Siri Deckert is an artist I had not known before starting this project. And I wondered if you could, I'm not sure who else here might have heard of Siri Deckert, which is a huge shame because she's an incredible artist. And I wondered if you could say more about Siri's work and Monica's relationship with Siri.
Yeah, I mean, the strange thing is that now I'm the Swedish art historian here, but actually it's not my responsibility within the museum. I'm actually in charge of international modern art, but somehow I kind of always come back to certain aspects of Swedish art. And one of the aspects, or one of the artists that I continuously come back to is actually Siri Deckert. And that was also interesting, not knowing Monica Sjöö that well, to understand how intimately they were actually connected. So Siri Deckert, and I'm not going to give a lecture on her either, that would be strange here, although I try every time I'm abroad to kind of push her a little bit. Siri Deckert is a hugely important Swedish artist. One of the first to exhibit it at Moderna Museet ever when we started, the first to hold the Nordic Pavilion in the Venice Biennale. Really one of these women artists who's the first at everything. And she was exhibiting and painting and working in Paris already in 1915. So she's very kind of holds this strong position in what we would call kind of first wave feminism, what you would call the suffragette movement, but we're a little bit later in terms of that. So she would be active in the 1920s, 1930s. In that time, she would have an incredible network of women, writers, politicians, thinkers around her that would really push on for the women's movement in Sweden, basically. She was a really special person, I think. She was working continuously up until her death, 1973. And interestingly enough, she met Monica quite soon, because Monica was, I think, when... I said to Amy, I can do this talk, but I cannot do any date. Like, I will not remember a single date. But when did Monica go to Bristol? In 56 or something like that?
I thought it was later. I thought it was slightly later than that.
Yeah, you would know better than I. She left early, but Monica came back to Stockholm in 67. I have an answer here.
She was back in Stockholm for 2 years?
Yeah, exactly, 67, 68, something like that, which of course is an important time at this point. And she started working for Siri. And I think that they were hugely influential for each other, which is interesting. It's not like Monica would be inspired and it would be a one-way conversation, but actually what is so interesting, and there is a great essay in the catalog about this as well, is that you can see a change in Siri Deckert's work, and they really kind of inspired each other. And one of Siri Deckert's best friends, actually, or kind of closest associates, were a writer called Elin Wägner. Elin Wägner is a very famous Swedish feminist writer, and she was very early on writing a book called, well, in Swedish it's Väckarklockan, but the translation would be, I guess, the alarm bell or something similar. Yeah, exactly, it says here. Then the alarm bell is actually one of these kind of proto-eco-feminist books. And we know from Monica's diaries that this was hugely influential on her, which kind of made this discussion very early in a kind of stage where you wouldn't really talk about ecofeminism. But this kind of came through these conversations with these well, quite older women, and I think that's interesting, honestly.
How much older was Siri from Monica at the time when they met?
I mean, I would imagine that Siri, again, dates, but she would probably be born in 1880, 1890, something like that.
Wow.
So and I mean, we were talking about what was found in the archive, and there were many letters between Siri and between Monica, where they were cheering each other on. And actually, I went through the Siri Deckert papers as well when we were doing research, and this is kind of a similar conversation.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating to find that. I mean, if I'd been doing it on my own, I would have just not even known what I was looking at. So yeah, it was the benefit of having a Swedish reader there.
But I have to say, I mean, I have this one chance. You have to Google her. She's an amazing artist. Like, do a show.
Yeah, but also I tried to find the alarm clock and it's impossible to find in English. This
Yeah,
is
I
not
imagine.
something that is not available to us at all. So there's a whole movement, the feminist movement in Sweden, it was so much earlier in some ways. And Monica really, I had a sense of that was really incubated in her in Stockholm before she moved to Bristol. She brought this energy and activism and organising and ecofeminism idea already fully formed in Stockholm that allowed her to be so energetic in Bristol.
Yeah, I think it's perhaps important, and this was a surprise to me as well, to understand how present Monica Sjöö was in a Swedish art scene, and especially in a Stockholm art scene. She was exhibiting, she was constantly in contact with many artists, and she was actually in contact with them throughout her life. She was acting more or less like a correspondent of sorts, kind of channeling or funneling informations about what was happening in Sweden, what was happening in the UK. And interestingly enough, and I think we don't talk enough about this, she was also in constant contact with both West Coast artists, New York artists, and she was really kind of acting as an intermediary, you say in English, right? Between different scenes. And I think that was also a huge part of her contribution to these different scenes.
Exactly. We're very lucky to have the Monica Sjöö estate with us, and Annie, who represents the estate, and also Maggie Parks, who was a long-term friend of Monica, and they've described them as Monica as being this amazing networker. And I think that might have different connotations now, but she definitely connected people. That was part of her organising, and I do think that maybe isn't so obvious in the exhibition, but when we were looking through the archive and the volumes of photo albums that we have taken some of those images for the catalogue, but it's just a phenomenal community around her that she really forged, I think.
No, it's just a phenomenal task. I mean, she had 3 children and she was writing, 15 letters a day. More or less, I'm in shock.
Yeah.
Really, who has time for that? I mean,
exactly.
Maybe if you miss out on a few episodes of The Crown, you could do a few, but not 15. So I'm impressed, honestly.
Exactly.
But I think it actually is present in the show. I'm sorry, when I start talking, I always talk and talk
no,
and talk,
no,
so
go
you
for
have
it.
to stop me. But I think it is present in the wall of posters. I was thinking about it yesterday, actually, when you were giving an introduction. Because one thing that is so very apparent when you look into Monica's art, and quite rare, actually, is that she's so focused on, reaching out, on connecting, on kind of forming alliances, or on inviting people to take part of something. And this is really present in the posters and the many, many, many campaigns and, grassroots organizations and meetings that she was involved in. And of course, it's in very important in the way she writes her letters and the way she contacts people, but also in her practice of writing. I mean, she was a hugely prolific writer, and she would kind of contribute to all the magazines that she could, and really trying to reach out. And especially, and interestingly enough, I briefly mentioned that I kind of came to Monica after coming out of this Hilma af Klint period, who is a very, very introvert person, especially thinking about her spiritualist kind of practice, whilst as Monica's spiritualism and kind of her beliefs are not something that is shut off or something that she keeps private, but she's, continuously in a conversation with people and with the world. And I think that's fascinating, and one of the things that makes her so very contemporary or present, or,
I think we're described as being energetic is the word, but I think it's that doesn't necessarily mean she was a very prolific painter, but it was definitely this holistic approach to organising, to speaking, discussing, to meeting. And I think we wanted to really capture that in this exhibition, was to include paintings and also works on paper, but the archive, the slides, the posters, footage, to really encapsulate this the very many aspects of her life. With that in mind, one thing I've put down to discuss is maybe the challenges of making an exhibition such as this with an artist who is we've been very reluctant to refer to her as being unknown, which is very tempting for someone who maybe isn't as widely known as they should be, because she was certainly incredibly well known. I mean, I'm sure many of you here tonight are aware of her, which is wonderful, which is really, and I hope many more people come to see the show. And it's very much the incentive of doing this show was to really celebrate that. But the challenge of it is that she hasn't been historicised in the way that she should do. That was a motivation for making the catalogue, for commissioning those texts. But this kind of very long process of research and of spending time with Annie in the estate. Annie, who is here, who was incredibly generous in giving us a lot.
Is Annie here? Actually?
She is. She's just there. She's at the back.
Sorry.
She's just walked in. I can't even give enough thanks to Annie for allowing us the access that we had as curators to incubate and develop this exhibition, and giving us so much trust. I think when we came with a proposal and without, a time frame which spanned the pandemic and also spanned 2 pregnancies for you, and a huge amount of time and a lot of pausing and a lot of planning, but to arrive at this point has been a huge achievement. And I think maybe can we perhaps talk about our expectations before we made this exhibition and what we uncovered through the process of it. And I guess it's a huge, for me at least, it was an enormous learning experience to understand. I think before I was aware through Monica's archives at Feminist Archive South that she was incredibly well connected. But I perhaps didn't understand how incredibly industrious and committed and prolific and relentless she was in her making and organising and communicating throughout her life. And the archive really testifies to that. But there's also the challenge of bringing an interpretation to the work from an art historical point of view for the first time in a very substantial and serious way. I think we're also very indebted to Rupert White's work around Monica and the books that he's published on her. Those are enormous reference points, I think, in pulling together a biography and to create a narrative around the artist, I think.
I think it's hugely important with these type of projects to acknowledge that this is work that has been done by many people in small instances. And of course, you thanked Annie, but Annie, you're almost like the third curator of this exhibition, even though I don't see you. And I think sometimes we forget about the importance of archives and archiving. And there are these discussions now in symposium, which I really strongly support, that are talking about activism and archives, and archivism as activism, which is incredibly important. And I'm always struck when I'm in the UK about how good you are actually at this, especially in terms of oral history and keeping so much. We are terrible at this in Sweden. But of course, you and I are art historians. Coming into the archive was a shock to me. It was something I could continue doing for years. I think there is a book or 3 books to be written about Monica Sjöö. I think this is the first major museum exhibition, but I'm pretty convinced there will be an even larger one in a few years. And there is lots of materials. I'm trying to push it on every art student I ever meet, saying that there is at least 10 dissertations in this archive. I'm sorry, Annie, I haven't told you about this, but you're going to be busy. And of course, it's, this type of exhibition, and it's always difficult sometimes to explain the amount of work which is behind it. And this is not to, kind of credit ourselves, but honestly, the amount of work that also comes with, documenting everything. In terms of Annie's work with actually archiving, documenting, organizing, thinking about everything. And I think that comes down to 15, 20 years or something like that. You'll have to speak for yourself. But it's an intense work. And now for this specific exhibition, just doing the catalog, having to kind of dig through everything and, take new photographs of everything. And we actually had the possibility thanks to the estate, to have the works in the museum for almost 6 months, I think. So
Yeah.
I got quite intimately connected to them because we needed to photograph them, because some of them needed to be restored. I mean, it's an amazing job, and it's the best part of my job, honestly, when
Yeah.
you get to do these things. And then you see the show and it's up for 6 months or 3 months, and you go like, okay. But really, it feels like something that is quite important.
Yeah, it was hugely important. And I should also credit Moderna Museet's investment in this exhibition through the conservation, through the photography, and the framing of works as well, in order to make these works exhibition ready, because they really were in storage for a very long time. I'm just consulting my notes of another point that I wanted to reference is part of I guess that our time in the archive was also, I think, discovering a part of Monica's involvement in Greenham Common and within Women for Life on Earth, these movements in the 80s when she was living in Wales that I had not anticipated finding, really. This was something that I was aware of. The works had changed, and after the goddess Avery Silby, there was a shift in her work, at which the ecofeminism becomes much more pronounced. She's living in Wales. Her work practice is moving away from the Marxist materialist demands of the women's liberation movement to something that's more about our relationship to nature and each other and the goddess, of course. But this moment, particularly in the 80s around Greenham Common, was entirely new to me. And I think I just wanted to have a moment to explain, as part of our research, was stumbling upon this slide selection, which I feel very attached to in the exhibition. It's a very small moment, I suppose, in our middle galleries, but for me, really speaks to her practice in a very broad sense as an activist, as an artist, as someone who seemed to always have a camera on them all the time throughout their life. And this, the Reclaim Salisbury Plain March, was something that we were in the archive and just researching and looking very speculatively to see what we could find. And this was a real moment of joy for me to find these colour images. And I borrowed a projector from the workshop and we had a look together and we were like, oh, wow, these are amazing photos. So I just wanted to point to that. But also what I was interested in is, Joe, from your point of view, the history of Greenham Common was completely new to a Swedish audience. This is not something that was known so much, or at least when we were talking about this moment in Monica's life, this would be a new territory for you to work with in the museum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was, in a Swedish perspective, this is something that needed to be much explained. I mean, we were talking this earlier today. I went to this show at Tate, Women in Revolt. And I was explaining, of course, that this, for me, is a history that I don't know that well. And I mean, this is the same thing for a Swedish audience. We wouldn't be, intricately connected to the ins and outs of the kind of political landscape of the UK at the time. But on the other hand, again, it speaks to a very Swedish moment at the same time. I mean, these are parallel processes, even though this specific event was a very UK-based one. But I think, importantly, with this material, I was also very surprised, and of course, I learned a lot. I would never have known the Reclaim Salisbury March. It was not part of my historical kind of concept. But I think, interestingly enough, it made sense. It makes sense that whatever Monica does, she's so consistent from the early works in the 60s up until, very late works in the 2000s. She's continually pushing the same thing, which is absolutely astonishing to me. And her kind of resistance to, I'm sorry, my English is failing me slightly, compartmentalize, you say? Compartmentalize, her spiritual beliefs, her personal life, her political standpoints. Instead, they're always continuously merged in a very, very strong way. And I think, this eco-feminist part was surprising to me, but not that. When you saw it, you was like, of course. Of course, it makes sense. And I also particularly like the way that she would, make it very personal, in the sense that she would tie it together with these specific places and sites that was so sacred and so important to her, and how those sites were kind of being cut off of landscapes, and they were being taken over by military, and of course it made sense. And there's always this kind of interconnectivity between her different, how she looks at or how she perceives the world around her, and I think that's amazing.
Something I was also drawn to her as an artist was also the very indiscriminate way that she uses her work. She uses it to illustrate the publications that she contributed to, her poetry. But this is a wonderful example of her creating a banner for a protest for the march from Cardiff to Brawley. And then this is later kind of stretched or put onto board to transform into a painting. And in the catalogue, I don't have a photo of it, but she takes Mother Earth in Pain to a GM crops processing science lab, and stands in the car park carrying out rituals with her paintings to one side. And I just absolutely love that about her, the lack of preciousness I think she has to her work. Not that they're not important, but she understands their different uses in different contexts.
Yeah, and perhaps the kind of iconic nature of the works in the true sense of the meaning, not in the kind of art market sense of iconic, but really the fact that they were, again, meant to do something in the world. They were not meant to be just observed or seen, but actually, again, act for change. And I think that's very, very relevant when you see her kind of walking around with them, or, as you say, posting them in demonstrations or in any way using it. I was a little bit disappointed that she actually mounted this one. I love the banners.
The banner. She has cut it slightly. It's a bit smaller than the banner.
But I will live with that.
But in terms of how her work functions as a different tool, this was also a key conversation that we had with Cathy Jones at the Glastonbury Goddess Temple. Yeah. So we're very lucky to have this painting in our exhibition. It wasn't, sadly, it isn't travelling to Sweden, but Cathy was pointedly reminded us, I think, in conversations about the loan of this work, that this is also a tool for devotion. In some sense, the works are within the context of an exhibition, within a gallery. We're approaching them within the context of an artistic practice. But the goddess context is also incredibly important. And this work usually sits within Goddess Hall in Glastonbury, where it has a very different purpose and a very different audience. So I think that's something that we've kept in mind, at least, and we alluded to that in the catalogue, that we were treading a careful line, I think, on occasions about how we are approaching these works, to kind of fully represent the very many aspects of her life and work.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I'm so really disappointed that this work was not in Stockholm. There are some amazing works here that was not part of the Stockholm exhibition, so you should really enjoy them. I was almost pissed off when I saw them in the gallery. Especially this one, which is incredible. But I'm trying to get through that, and I can't even remember what you were asking. Yeah, of course. In terms of spirituality,
well, just that these are not just artworks, I suppose. When we are looking at them within the historical context.
This is, of course, a very long discussion in terms of art history and the purpose of art and religious art in particular, and how we kind of perceive of that. I think it's a balancing act. I really do. It was partly, we started out talking about this incredibly weird purple, carpet I had, and thinking about how do we kind of locate these works. And I think it's really interesting to see them up here because you have, as we were talking about, even though this is a brewery, it has this kind of almost church-like status. And church is, of course, also very problematic in terms of Monica's work. And how do we think about that, and altarpieces and so forth. It is a balance. I think it's a balance that also we were talking about why has perhaps Monica Sjöö fallen a little bit in between chairs. One aspect is, of course, the way that she deals with spirituality, which has been taboo in the art world for a very, very long time. And I think we're finally at this moment when we can start to talk about this. And just recently there was this major Chicago exhibition that opened in New York. I think it opened in October or so. Actually, for the first time, showing some of Judy's works that has been a major part of her art, but still we kind of see these car hoods and the kind of dinner table. That's the only thing we see because no one has really kind of wanted to touch these other works. And it's interesting to see how their kind of careers align.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, they were also in touch, and they were kind of appears to a point. And I think Maggie said it's a shame that Monica passed away so soon, relatively, because given that the length of Judy Chicago's career, this has arrived at her now in her 80s, I think, at this point.
Yeah, but there are a series, of course, of especially West Coast women, but also East Coast artists that are really famous in terms of, conceptual works within a feminist practice, but that were also very much connected to a goddess movement, of course. But that has been, disregarded in that sense for a long time.
One thing I have been thinking about, I guess, since installing the show and walking around is that the earlier works in the upper gallery from the 1970s are so explicitly, so direct in their feminist messaging, I think. But it's also important to remember these paintings also, the later works come from the same position. And somehow that is often lost, perhaps. It might be tempting to read Monica's work within a more romantic idea of the landscape and the goddess, but it still comes from this position of wanting to end patriarchy, thinking about ancient matriarchal cultures to bring about a total revolution. And I think that's something that I personally have always have kept in mind when researching and working on this exhibition is it challenges my expectations of what a feminist art practice might look like, or how political art is manifested, at least.
Yeah, and I think also it takes a little bit of time. I mean, to understand these works is to really understand them, I think, is a lifetime practice. We have to remember that Monica Sjöö was also, researching. She was a complete, researcher in the sense that she spent almost a lifetime trying to understand symbols, communities, historical contexts, and she was writing and writing and writing, and she was adding on layers in her paintings. And the paintings can be read from a very, very specific, and I think there's this beautiful slideshow that we haven't really talked about in the gallery upstairs, which also shows some of
that
her.
One.
Yeah,
Here, so this is the slideshow.
Shows some of the references, and we did manage to see some recordings of Monica actually doing almost performance lectures, talking about her work. And when you see those, you actually understand how complex they are and how kind of put together they are. And I think she very early on started on this almost impossible project that I really want to understand more about, because it's almost like she's trying to construct a belief system or kind of construct a theory that doesn't relate to opponents. I'm again not finding the correct English word, but black and white, dark and light, and of male, female, and I think it's incredibly difficult to do that. And you can see it over and over again in her works that she's really kind of struggling to bring forth knowledge, experiences that have been pushed to the side for reasons of rationality or patriarchy or systems in general, and she's trying to put them side by side, and that's a difficult thing to do because most of our thinking for a very long time is actually based on these kind of dual ideas. And I think that's the true kind of braveness of Monica's work. But I'm not really there to talk about it yet, but that's what really kind of incites me. And I think there's, again, I think there's another book there.
There is another
It's not my book, but, someone has a chance.
But there are also, I mean, we have maybe 80 slides in this carousel, and I don't even know, there are hundreds and hundreds of them. I mean, there could be like a whole hours long of these slide lectures that she would give, and she became very well known for.
There's like one moving box of, images marked trees, right? Or stones, or, it's an incredible life achievement.
It is, yeah, and I think when you get to the final gallery upstairs, you can also notice the references she kind of uses. These are references for her own kind of anthropology into these histories, but also you recognise the motifs that she uses in the paintings. In the lectures, she would intersperse her own artworks in this herstory, I suppose. So yeah, I find these really, really fascinating. And I also, when we were in the archive, just the quantity of invitations that she received to give these lectures is phenomenal as well. Clearly it's artistic, but it was never considered so, or at least acknowledged, or at least framed in that way. Yeah. I think she saw it within her practice, but perhaps from our contemporary art point of view, for me, this is a performative iteration of her ideas.
But I think, I mean, we started this with a question also about, you know, the archives and what does it mean and so on. And, you know, how did we kind of come to that? I think there was this one point in our research that was hugely important. I mean, there were many points, but like one point that was important to me when we visited the Feminist Archive South archives in Bristol. And we had this wonderful time, and you know, suddenly I understood, because we were asking, so how many people do access this material? How many people research the Monica Sjöö papers? And you know, they told us that really there's a lot. There's many students, many researchers that enter this material, but perhaps not from, you know, the point of our historical research or, you know, doing research on Monica Sjöö specifically, but because she spent a lifetime researching and gathering materials, these, you know, papers are so important for anyone, you know, in the historical department, or thinking about, you know, social justice in South America, or thinking about GMO crops and the kind of history of how that has evolved. And there's this kind of bank of knowledge that is just immense.
Yeah, it was huge. I think, yeah, many users of theology or other spirituality or forms of histories of goddess feminism, which is, you know, kind of the rich quality of a practice such as this.
Again, it makes you want to cancel your Netflix account immediately. It's just incredible.
I'm just looking through my notes of other slides that we have to just refer to.
Yeah, I have no idea what slides we have,
also,
so
I'm very indebted to our
curious.
curator Jess for putting these together for us. I mean, these are the two works that were, you know, in your collection, and maybe something I touched on in the tour that we had last night was the renewed significance this painting particularly gained during the time of curating the show. I think it was last summer the US Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, which is the constitutional right to abortion. And suddenly, this painting is 55 years old, and it feels, you know, horrifically relevant today. And maybe there's a question about the timeliness of this work and the timing of this exhibition. And I think a few people have noticed, obviously, there's Women in Revolt on show in London at the moment, there's a Resistors exhibition in Barbican, there is a feminist moment perhaps happening in the UK, a belated review, I think, of this history. But maybe we can think about the timeliness of Monica's work. And also that relates to another thing I wanted to say was we were very keen this wasn't a 70s feminist art show. I remember that was one of the first conversations that we had to insist on the prescience and relevance of this practice and to keep it contemporary and to not only focus on works made during the 70s.
Yeah, I think in a way, I mean, and we talked about this the other day, I think we started from an art historical perspective, thinking about an overlooked artist, which is already a trap. And you mentioned it before that, I mean, this is now institutional strategy, thinking about overlooked women artists that we can finally kind of blow up. And it's a ridiculous practice, specifically because it kind of undermines what we're trying to do, because always insisting on some of these women artists having been, you know, put to the side, not visible, and so on, is also undermining what they actually did. And again, you mentioned that Monica Sjöö was very much present. She was, you know, on the cover of newspapers. She was, you know, very much in the debate. But that's another, you know, I can get really upset about this. In terms of starting as an art historical exhibition, of course, this depressingly enough turned out not to be. Not only did we have Roe versus Wade, we were discussing things I would never think we were to discuss, both here in the UK and the US, obviously, but also in Sweden, and kind of going back all over Europe in terms of abortion rights and so forth. We also have a war in Europe, which happened during this research process. And everything kind of came together as becoming more and more urgent. And this is, you know, of course, if I would be cynical, I would say, oh, timely, you know, but not really.
Not really.
And it's incredibly difficult to have to think of these works or Monica's works as something that is not finished, you know, that we're not there yet, that we have to continue this fight. On the other hand, I really feel, and I keep, you know, pushing this, but I really feel that her works urge us to continue that fight.
absolutely. This is maybe a nice slide to end on before we perhaps have some questions. But this is Monica, you know, in the 90s, I think, where she was still fighting and she was still traveling and attending protests up until, you know, stopping the Iraq War was one of the final protests that she went on, holding Picasso's piece posters.
It's actually quite beautiful because there was this big march in Stockholm just in the early fall. This was Fridays for Future demonstrating, and it gathered. It was a huge conference, and it gathered like 3,000 people, young people, and they were carrying Monica Sjöö posters. It was really beautiful, actually, to see it happen. And they would have, you know, the goddess returning posters, or they would have made their own posters. They would use ours, but they also kind of did their own versions, and it was really quite special to see. You know, and we had nothing to do with this, really. It was just, you know, them kind of finding inspiration in this. And very early on, we had youth councils and young people engaged in the exhibition, actually, before it even opened. And they were so inspired by Monica, and I think that's also very interesting and very important.
Yeah, and likewise, we, not quite to the level that you have, but we have a young creators program at the gallery, and I invited some former members to perhaps write some more text in the exhibition, which you can see upstairs. And I thought, oh, maybe they might choose some of the later works, or they might like the greener material. Yeah. But they all chose quite challenging works from the 70s, particularly with backstreet abortion, but also works which are the much more, you know, the feminist demands that really spoke to them right now. And I found that really hopeful. I think that they felt kind of inspired and championed by her work. It can translate down.
Yeah, it did. I mean, that was actually a great experience. That was the best experience. I mean, it's not often you do art shows and you have a crowd, you know, 17-year-olds, but it was great. I feel like I have absolutely no concept of time, but I feel like if there, I mean, we chat and we chat and we chat, and we've been chatting for, I don't know, 4 years now. So maybe if there's questions or comments, I know most likely one or two or some or many of you knew Monica, or, you know, there's always people turning up knowing Monica in these conversations, and you always kind of feel a little bit silly acting like an expert, and then, you know, someone comes up afterwards and, you know, are truly an expert on this and so forth. So I kind of want to say that if there's questions or comments.
Yeah, I think we have a microphone going around as well, so if you wouldn't mind waiting for the mic.
Thank you. Earlier you said that a lot of galleries have been avoiding the spiritual works and the spiritual aspects of works of women artists. Can you explain that a little bit, why that is?
I was not specifically referring to galleries. That would be unfair. I was saying institutions or art world. I think this has changed the last 15, 20 years. Why? It's a good question. I think in terms of feminist art, this is, I mean, already at the time, I think there were huge internal debates within different communities of feminist artists or feminist activists, thinking about the spirituality practice as something that was actually not helpful somehow, that, you know, again, women were kind of put into this fold of being spiritual, feminine, you know, these kind of values that were associated, and not, you know, actively politically taking part of a conversation in another way. You would see kind of this split, for instance, between concept art and, you know, some artists that were working in a much more spiritual sense or spiritual understanding. Sorry, I fail to kind of find the right wording. You have to remember that I'm not a native English speaker. But I think also in terms of art historians, we've been really, really afraid of touching these subjects. And I think it's still rather tricky. I mean, it's rather tricky for me giving tours and talking about Monica's spiritual beliefs, that some of them I share, some of them I absolutely don't share. And I've been in this position earlier with other artists where I'm, you know, explaining belief system, and, you know, everyone comes up to me afterwards and thinks that I'm somehow, you know, a cult person or something. And of course, I think we have to be really precarious, and I think we're getting better as art historical, you know, associates, let's say, to be able to not shy away from these questions.
I wonder how much Hilma af Klint has shifted the dial on that the impact of her work and that representation now in terms of her. It's a very different spiritualism, but that allowed a re-evaluation of an abstract practice, I suppose.
I mean, I don't think that Hilma in herself, of course, but I think that since the 90s, there is this re-evaluation where we talk about abstraction, for instance, in terms of, you know, also including spiritual aspects. We talk about Kandinsky in terms of spiritualism. And I think that's very important, specifically for women artists. I don't know if that was the answer. I mean, it's a very big debate, why we're afraid of spiritualism. I'm still afraid of it, but I'm slowly working towards acceptance.
Yeah, I'm not so afraid of it. I think maybe
I know you're much better than me.
I think I was looking for an alternative way of thinking and experiencing the world, and I think maybe there's a receptiveness to an alternative reality now within the collective consciousness. Maybe there's a wider interest in mysticism, maybe in other forms of knowledge and practice than maybe there has been previously, particularly by younger people. I think it comes through, I guess, you take the temperature of the times and what the appetite is, and I think maybe there's just a more open-minded approach to thinking about creativity and how we all experience our sense of reality, I suppose.
So just in a way, as a reply to that, Sue and I come from the Goddess Temple in Glastonbury.
Yeah, great.
And we are honoured to normally have that painting that you had on show in the Goddess Hall. We've got some other beautiful paintings in the Goddess House. And being able to experience those paintings in a divinely feminine, decorated, soft environment with carpets and cushions and comfy sofas and places to contemplate and be, you really feel the energy and the wisdom that she's painted into those paintings on an almost energetic level come alive. I mean, I've had beautiful experiences of in ceremony diving into that tunnel and just feeling like I'm going into West Kennet Long Barrow. And so that expression of bringing the spirituality into painting, into art, and having it as a living experience. It's just so special, and it's one of the gifts that Monica was able to translate into her artwork, which I think is really inspiring people. I remember at university, I did my dissertation on the spirituality in art, and it was so hard to try and find examples of that because it was all about political art or radical art, and trying to reclaim the spirituality in it is something that was really taboo.
Yeah. No, I think you're very right. I think, I just came out as this kind of hardcore person. Of course, I'm not really. But I always say the same thing to my team when I'm doing an exhibition. I was like, oh, you can't believe the energy of these paintings when you actually see them. Okay, they look a little bit so on the images, but really. And I came to them for like the 15th time with this Monica Sjöö exhibition. I was like, really? There's this energy when you see them. And actually, for the first time, they kind of said, okay, you were right. Again, we had the privilege of having them within the museum for such a long time, and they were actually all gathered in this room very tightly in the conservational department. And, people were kind of spending time there and, trying to understand them. And it always became this kind of pause thing that everyone in the museum went in there. This sounds terrible. Not everyone. They were very safe. But, you had to come back to them, and they have this kind of pull on you, and they have the energy. And I think this is very present in the show here. We're looking at images from Stockholm, but this last gallery that you devised is so powerful. It was actually quite overwhelming for me to come in. And I think there is something there. You're absolutely right. And of course, I apologize. I should never say that I'm pissed when someone is in the audience. And, you should know your audience. That's the cue.
Yeah.
I'd like to say the other thing about Monica's political work, the group that I'm involved with, which has been promoting and supporting Monica for the last 5 years, her Mother Earth in Pain, we took to COP26 as placards. We had broad, big billboards made around the streets of Bristol, and they're very, very powerful for the present moment. And I just want to say another thing, which is in Bristol, there is now a blue plaque that celebrates Monica's life and work and the time she lived in Bristol.
Amazing.
Oh, for those who don't know, blue plaque. Oh, is it green? But for those who don't know, I don't think you have them in Sweden.
No, we don't.
You know,
I've seen them. I know what it
know.
is. Yeah. Thank you, though. It's a plaque. Let's decide on that.
The creative captions that you mentioned made reference to cultural appropriation, and sort of said, well, she didn't think it was, or he or she didn't think it was. But there were some images there, I must say, that did give me some sort of pause for thought in that direction, and I wondered whether that was. Is it just because we've become more sensitive to these things since the 1970s? Was that something that you were sort of aware of or concerned about in putting the show together?
It's something that I think we are both aware of, the references and the way that Monica is referring to ancient cultures and how that manifests in her work. And it's something that, I think in preparing for the exhibition, talking to the art historians is also very useful. And I think it's understanding Monica was working from a very early intersectional context. I think she was creating images from the spirit of universal kinship with women from all cultures and wanting to mobilize the demands of the feminist movement in order to emancipate all women from across the world. So that does take place. It formalizes in a way that I think from a contemporary point of view seems perhaps outdated in places, but I think I feel I'm respecting her position as an activist and really wanting to kind of create the most direct messages to communicate to the audience her ideas. And so her treatment of certain motifs and symbols and archetypal figures, certainly, from a contemporary point of view, it might read differently, but I'm in making the exhibition, I was concerned to not want to apologize for the work. I think we have to live with the contradictions that she states. And I think we have to accept the times that we live in and how politics and feminism discourse changes over time. But I think there's still so much to be had within the work. I think we were conscious of just letting Monica speak for herself and the movement that she was working in. And these are complex works. They're very complicated and complex. They were challenging from the start. She was controversial from the start. But the works, their complexities deal with the complex times she was also living and working in. I don't want to suggest that the women's art movement or feminism was a cohesive movement. It was very divisive and divided at times. But I think it's being able to accept the extraordinary trajectory of an artist's career and all of the complicated nuances within it, and to be able to still understand what this practice was achieving. I think that was something that I personally felt when we were working on this exhibition. Do you have any other questions?
Have you had the chance to see the show? Okay. Yeah. Then it becomes very abstract.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, if there's no questions now, sometimes it's intimidating to ask questions in a mic with, 100 people here. We're here.
Yeah, I'm around. I would love to talk. I would love to hear what you think about the show. And think. Oh, we have one more. Oh, hang on. Would you mind just waiting for a mic? Then everyone can hear.
Here, I just promised the mic-free possibility of asking questions.
Well, Stockholm exhibition had a catalogue, didn't it?
Yes.
Will there be one for this exhibition?
It is the same catalogue, only in English. So we have one. So yeah.
And do you know when we can buy it?
It is in our shop. So we have, if you just go through to the end, we have a bookshop, and then there's many copies there available.
All right, that's all. That was my question.
Oh, great question. Yeah, please go to the shop and buy the catalogue and please read about it. But just while we wrap up, I just wanted to thank Jo again so much for being here and for going on this journey together. It's been a wonderful collaboration, and I've had a great time working with you, and also to Annie as well, and her family, for being just completely fantastic and committed and so generous, and really great guidance on bringing all this work together. And also my team at Modern Art Oxford, to Jess Robertson for her support on making the event today, for our technicians and all our front of house staff for hosting the event, to our interpreter Richard McCormack, Richard, who's signing for us this evening. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, please enjoy the evening. You can go upstairs and see the show.
Thank you.